كلا لو كلا لو تعلمون علم اليقين
كلا لو تعلمون علم اليقين
كلا لو تعلمون علم
ثم لترون الجحيم
كل كلا لو تعلمون علم اليقين
كلا لو تعلمون علم اليقين لترون الجحيم
لتور لترون الجحيم
لترون الجحيم Yeah.
لترون الجحيم
لترون الجحيم.
My apologies, but where are we on? I don't think
we're on Surah
I
Al-Hijab.
think you could flip the page. I think it's
Okay.
top of the next.
Is that where it is?
Second to last. Okay.
Sorry, I
Oh,
give
you're
you one
good.
of
No,
the
this one right
small,
here.
small. You want? I give you one of the bigger handwriting in Arabic.
Sure. And do you mind repeating the?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
لترون الجحيم
لما تره الجحيم
لترون الجحيم
لترون الجحيم ثم لترونها عين اليقين
ثم لترونها عين اليقين
ثم لترون عين اليقين
ثم لترونها عين اليقين
ثم رأوها كالمحين
ثم ثم لترونها عين اليقين
ثم لترونها عين اليقين ثم لتسألن يومئذ عن النعيم
Yeah.
ثم لتسألن يومئذ عن النعيم
ثم لتسألن يومئذ عن النعيم
ثم لتسألن يومئذ عن النعيم. Very good.
ثم لتسألن يومئذ عن النعيم
ثم لتسألن يومئذ عن النعيم.
I'm gonna respect it.
Sorry.
No worries. Yeah.
Sorry, everyone has different experience levels and
Yeah.
different appreciate
No,
you
that's
joining,
okay,
man.
yeah.
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
ثم لتسألن يومئذ عن النعيم
ثم لتسألن يومئذ عن النعيم. You guys are getting it.
I'm very impressed.
It's
Right?
difficult,
Yeah.
man. It's,
Yes,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
really
It's
I
tough.
there's no monitor.
and especially when it gets to the end of the circle, you like forget the pitch.
Yeah,
Everyone is
exactly.
Because I feel like I'm falling into the
Yeah.
other.
I realize that.
You gotta call us out. You gotta be like, hey, this is wrong.
I'll post in the group
Yeah,
an example of maqam hijaz, and you guys can practice it. You know.
Okay.
So
I like
that way-
the مقام الحجاز مقام
Yeah,
الحجاز.
that one's really good. Yeah.
Did I do it correctly?
A little,
Oh.
pretty close.
Okay, do it
Slightly
again.
off.
مقام الحجاز مقام الحجاز مقام الحجاز مقام الحجاز.
Just do the same tour again.
مقام الحجاز مقام الحجاز.
You gotta release your voice more.
I don't know.
Release.
Yeah.
Get lower.
Get the air out.
Yeah, like know, like
So one thing is you
almost
want
like how
you want to
get voice.
project your voice, right?
It's one of those
Project.
things.
So almost
Yeah,
open
project.
it up and project it so that
Be a
other
different
people
person
can hear it,
almost.
right? So, but eventually then you can do adhan in this, right? So, inshallah, because I know it took quite a bit of
No,
time.
it's okay. No, alhamdulillah.
Yeah, but like adhan, I think is very, very good to practice in this maqam, right? Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, right? So if you practice that, if you just practice that, that will really teach you the intonations of maqam hijaz, right? So, and that's very standard. A lot of times in Mecca and Medina, they recite it fast. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, and then they'll just keep going, right?
So that's tempo. That's the speed
Yeah.
is tempo.
So you know, brother Naeem, whenever he reads Adhan, that's the maqam. He always uses that maqam, right?
Beautiful.
But yeah, it's a very beautiful maqam to use for Adhan.
Now,
So
I've got a question. I think almost like even in the beginning of the chapter as well as the end of the chapter, I think you're starting with a lower pitch and then you end with a higher pitch. Is that kind of a natural
Yes,
progression that
yeah.
you sometimes go through?
yeah.
Is that
So
something that
let
you
me
do?
read the whole surah and then you
Yeah.
can kind of see how it goes,
Sure.
right? بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ألهاكم التكاثر حتى زرتم المقابر كلا سوف تعلمون ثم كلا سوف تعلمون كلا لو تعلمون علم اليقين لترون الجحيم ثم لترونها عين اليقين ثم لتسألن يومئذ عن النعيم. Right? So that's how you can see it modulated, right? And I'm just using the qara, right? So if you wanted to ثم لتسألن يومئذ عن النعيم. You could use
This
go up
is
like
the
that,
higher
right?
octave is what you
Yeah,
use.
so that's going into the kind of the jawab, right? So, but just if you're gonna go qarar or the low pitch, right? That's how you would recite it.
But
And
even then, you're still modulating pitches.
even
within that
still,
pitch.
you modulate with your voice. Yeah. So there's still some octave variation, right, in between. But then when you go into a different octave or you go sort of at a higher pitch, that's when you get into the jawab, right? But I think just learning how to just you don't have to learn all the scientific technicalities of it, but just be able to copy that tune. That will really help you to like make your voice stronger. And maqam hijaz is one of the best ones to start with because it really has a lot of power in it. You know, if you can recite with this maqam, like everybody will find your recitation really beautiful. It's a very powerful, passionate maqam, right? So inshallah, hopefully we'll keep practicing.
All right, inshallah.
And I'll post a video or like a clip, a recitation, and then I'll also post you guys some examples of other reciters using this maqam so you can practice it.
Brother, so because you mentioned how like you start with a higher pitch or lower pitch, etc.
Yeah.
It depends on the surah.
It
Like
does.
the words.
Yes.
That's what I'm guessing, right?
You got it.
Yeah.
Even the feelings within the surah.
Yeah.
change.
The meanings. in
The meanings. It's like the
verse.
person, the words,
Talking about
everything.
Jahannam is different than Jannah.
Jannah, right.
Yeah, a little break so we can sit up over there.
Do you guys have any other questions? Was it good class? Yeah.
Was it really good?
A little break. We'll be right back.
Instead of deleting the app, you know how long it takes to delete your
Yeah,
account?
if you go to settings and
It takes way longer. No, like you have to get verified. It's a whole request. He's like so. Oh, he's so. Oh my God.
it's so
He's like,
Thank you.
No, it's yours.
No, it's not.
No, it's yours. It's yours specifically.
Specifically yours.
You're going home with it.
How are you doing?
It was amazing, man.
Yeah, mashallah.
I appreciate it. It really helps the recitation, but usually like we come into a real right? We can add this and it buys us time because sometimes like even as soon as Like there's a student like pseudo books like it's so long that we don't know like every step you get them there. But if you read it with language, you have time, you buy time, look at it, and like kind of like see okay what's the word. Otherwise, when you're reading plain, like
This is almost like a scale pattern in a way.
Yes,
So
yes,
when
it
you
does.
go up with the octave, it kind of
Yep,
that does change.
yeah, it's like basically switch. I think it's like they actually have like a scale, like a whole scale thing, like on a piano. You can actually
Correspond to those.
like a half note versus
Yeah.
a whole note. So
Right.
it's like you can actually follow different. It's actually considered like a melody ladder that you can go up and down on, right?
Right.
So
right.
so yeah, there's a lot when it comes to music theory. There's a lot that can go into this, but
Because it follows Western music.
yes, it does. It
Okay.
does, yes. So it's yeah,
Or I
but
should say, Western music theory follows that.
yeah, yeah,
Based on
yeah.
that.
In many ways, there's a key, but that's why it's like practicing the scales, like right. That pattern is very classic for jazz, right?
Right.
So, but I think a lot of it comes down to learning the modulation of the voice, like learning how many, like if you can do a
Steps to
full
go up or
octave
down.
and everything. Like, I think you already have like a really good voice, so you already have like, the capacity to do it. So inshallah, hopefully, as we keep doing it, you'll get that. I think as long as you just learn the way the intonation is, I think you'll do it. So I'm gonna
Mostly,
post some examples
Yeah,
of it,
please do.
and then I think you'll get the hang of it.
I'm like, yeah, I'm not really a music notation person. I wasn't ever classically trained, so I think by ear is really the best way for any kind of
Yes,
any type of instrument, whether it be
definitely. Yeah,
vocal or not.
yeah, of course, man. Yeah, thanks for attending, man.
Yeah, man, thank you. I got late,
Yeah, yeah.
but
No, no worries.
it's good. I'm glad I extended out. You know, like I wanted to kind of be here for all the classes. You know,
Oh, awesome.
so I'm glad I was here for the latter part of that.
Yes, of course, of course. Yeah, no, we had just gotten started with the game, so.
Okay.
We still got more sessions, inshallah. Yeah. Sorry to put you on the spot. I didn't know what to say. Yeah, you know, there's a. So I have a. I have a note
high school is the easiest. You know that's why high school people crazy.
It's actually a very interesting story.
There was this one
Actually, it was
Arabic guy.
very
He
interesting.
was like, bro, Zaidi, don't talk to him about it. Yeah, nice. And I hope you know that. Shows that he's gonna be there every single day. He doesn't go.
Do we have any more water, Abdullah?
Yes.
That's what you were talking the other day. That's
Yeah.
what you
So I just don't want to. If other brothers are thirsty, I don't want to.
like straight up weird behavior. That is straight up weird behavior.
I can go back. At like 8 p.m. in the night.
Just like looking for something.
I was yeah. I looked up and I said, yo.
You need to get like campus security. Actually, I've always seen him live on.
Yes.
Like, yeah.
Like 1 p.m. and shit started. So it's like 7 a.m.
Wait. Who? Oh yeah? Yeah.
Bro, one line ever known.
No, but next time you need to call campus.
Wow.
No, you can actually get kicked.
So beautiful.
Pretty much.
I never knew that, bro.
Into what I got.
But most of them were like,
It's like mine.
Don't even know them Muslim. They say it.
most of them were, not most, but Albania has a big percentage of Muslims, right? Yeah.
All right, let's start. Are we good, brother? Bilal? We're kind of okay. You think we're good, Bilal? Bilal, we good?
Yes.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Continue our series about the lesser known Sahaba. The purpose of this, we kind of talked about before, but we'll repeat the purpose every time, is twofold. One is we, as a school of thought, focus so much on Ahlul Bayt or Imams, but sometimes we forget the surroundings that are around them. Credit to our brothers, other schools of thought, mashallah, they get a good focus on the Sahaba. Colloquially, we do have literature that talks about Sahaba. More closely associated with Imams but sometimes it's good to see what their lives are, especially the ones that are close to the Prophet, what their stories were. It actually also paints a story of the Prophet himself. Number two is it also kind of cements our own reality, because the Imams, we reach that level. Inshallah, we try your best. But who are you in terms of a Sahaba? Who are you in terms of a companion at that time? What do you reflect as between that time and right now? You can actually reflect the companion of that time into reality right now, because we're fallible in mistakes, but we are fallible in mistakes. So, the first week we talked about Uthman bin Hanayf. Next week we talked about Anas bin Hatim al-Kahili. This week, as a suggestion from some of the brothers from last week, is Julaibeeb al-Shahid. It's actually a very interesting, slightly sad story, but it does provide aspects of the reality of the message, which I really enjoyed. I personally was not aware of this. He is actually present in both sources of literature, a little bit more in our brother's literature, but still present. And Julaibeeb, he really not much is known about his ancestry. That is because he himself was not very known. They say he's from Bani Tha'laba, tribe of some sort, from an Ansar, people that were living in Medina. They were the original people that welcomed the Prophet. Remember, in was the revelation in Mecca, and then 0 is when the Prophet migrated from Mecca to Medina after him and his companions were oppressed. And Medina are the people that accepted the Prophet as well as their companions. So he, Julaibeeb, was part of in Medina, the people in Medina.
I have to get that across.
Yeah.
Emergency gets caught.
You guys hear that?
Oh, that's your car.
What happened?
All right.
No, I just opened the door. I thought it was
Okay. So, he was part of the original people there. So his origin, right? Julaibeeb is an interesting name. It's not a very common name in Arabic. It's actually a pretty unique name, and it's almost like when I was reading, it's almost like a parody on jilbab. Jilbab is like a big long, coat or like jalabi. In the Quran it talks about like the overcoat of the women to cover themselves with. So it's almost like a play on that. Julaibeeb is like, I think it's because he was so short. He actually would be completely covered in this thing, right? So that's one thing with him physically. He was actually quite a short person. Number two, he was Danim, right? Which is a really sad Arabic word, which means one with objective ugliness. Where I think he had some kind of birth defect or something like that, where people would think objectively this person's not attractive, right? And there are some objective measures of attractiveness. Sometimes symmetry, sometimes things that some people in different cultures find exquisite or exotic. I don't know. But we can agree on there is some symptoms, some kind of objective attractiveness. And unfortunately, he didn't need that objective attractiveness. And actually, this story is actually pretty beautiful because it shows what Islam is all about, what Rasulullah is all about. So that's okay. So he's short. He objectively, let's say, not attractive. Number three, he really didn't have much of a family as just he didn't really have someone, people that are well known in his family, an uncle that is famous in war, or a rich, parents like that. But Banu Tha'laba, no one really knows about his nasab, too much. Number four, he was quite poor. They say he walked around barefoot. He barely had any inheritance. He barely had anything. This guy. But number five, he always stuck with the Prophet. He was a very, very sincere companion of the Prophet. He always did dhikr or supplications or remembrance of Allah. He would always stick with the Prophet no matter what. And it's interesting in his life. So during these years, we'll say 0 to let's say 3, he would always be with him, and the Prophet would say, why don't we get you married? Just to think about that. I don't think that's empathize with this guy. Right? Just think about you in that situation, because this actually also goes into our current society too. Goes into our current society as well, where we have people that especially monetarily, especially financially, where we're effective financially, right? Forget the other stuff too, but effective financially, right? Short and objectively not attractive. And this guy's talking about marriage. This also tells him we're talking about marriage here. The guy's like, hey, why don't you get married? What would your answer be if you were this guy? I mean, it's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, you told me.
Right?
Yeah.
So actually,
But even back then, I thought back then like they would be like, hey, marry me, and it's like it's not.
But this reflects actually.
Yeah,
But let me-
but
With him, it was a different case.
I see.
No. Actually, it wasn't just like you said.
Okay.
It's just like you said. No, people look for nasab, which is lineage and ancestry, so they can have pride. And you can maybe have inheritance out of it. People look for wealth. People look for beauty. People look for here's what in the end will conclude for you. So he didn't answer it. He's like he kind of answered.
Yeah.
Are you mocking me?
Yeah.
He also said, "And less to be kassid." Kassid is something that it's like a baba'a, or it's like if you have like a shop and you have some kind of supply, and it's something that no one would want to buy.
He's like, he's like I'm someone that no one wants to buy,
That's so sad.
right? You know,
That's so sad.
and actually, he said, "And Wallahi, because with Allah, I'm like nothing." You know, it's like, look at me, right? So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "No, I'll get you married." Right? So here's what happens. It's actually very interesting. And this is the real story, and it really just makes us reflect about ourselves, not just as as people growing up, from male and female, trying to find partners, but also as you guys compare us too. Inshallah, you guys will treat your son and your daughters. Think about this story, inshallah, because Allah and he was just it was just a birth defect. Was he also disabled? I'm not sure. But anyway, so one day some guy comes up to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? The guy is like, hey, I want to have my daughter married. Ya Rasulullah, Ya Rasulullah, I want my daughter to marry you. She's
To the Prophet.
to the Prophet. Right?
Okay. He's a prophet.
Everyone
wants their daughter to prophet.
He's got wealth now, mashallah. Subhanallah, right? I want. It's kind of it's there's two different narrations out of this. One is the guy comes up to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and tells him, "Hey, I want to marry my daughter. She's going to Mahira. She's married to Arab. She's like the one like the best, one who's worth a high mahar, one who's worth a high dower." Right?
Beautiful, in other words.
And another description he gave for his daughter is "Laysa biha sadak." And sadak can refer to either a defect or she never had a headache before. Again, metaphorically, she never had a defect. Or so that means she's never had the sun hit her, right? Mashallah, she's like so like beautiful or very like pure, I guess. So yeah, I want you to marry her. The other narration says that the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says he went to the guy and told him, hey, I want to get your daughter married. And the guy thought, hey, it's you. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he's like, oh yeah, okay, so let's get married. And the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, no, to Julaibeeb.
Wow.
And actually, the hadith that I read, or the narration I read, it says, the father's kind of like depressed with that, right? He just kind of turned away to go and tell the family. And they went and told the mom, and the mom was like, man, Julaibeeb, right? This is guys know, unfortunately, for the wrong things, right? So they all were like kind of saddened, right, with this proposition. And it kind of makes you also, if we kind of come back and think about, in terms of one of the hadiths for marriage, I think it's for marriage, especially, for males or for men out there, I think that kind of applies to both. But, I think it's from Rasulullah where he says, some people look for, hasab or jah, some people look for ancestry in their mates, and some people look for wealth in their mates, and some people look for beauty in their mates. But he's like, look for the one with religion, or look for the one with deen, look for the one with, the steadfast kind of conviction in, the one that you would accept as a religion or as a way of life, right? Your hand will be full. Your hand will be full. Find that kind of person, your hand will be full. And really is, if you want to talk about reality, that's actually the reality, right? And it's hard for us to accept. And it's really hard to have that faith in that. But anyway, but this story kind of shows the answer.
So, Sahaba, anyone who comes, for example, after the Prophet, but, for example, is with the Khalifa, for example, with the Imam Ali alayhi salam, is he considered also a Sahaba, his own Sahabas, when Prophet Muhammad was there?
So, the widespread definition of Sahaba is the one who has seen the Prophet. So that's the widespread definition. We can go deeper into that, based on each school of thought. That's the widespread definition. That's kind of almost the Quranic definition. Yes, anyone that's kind of next to the thing, right? But in reality, it's not a testament to good or bad. Quranically, Quran, it's not either good or bad. It just needs someone who has been with, right?
So there can be bad Sahaba.
Yes. At least in the Quran. That's how to set this.
Because Muawiyah is considered a Sahaba.
Yeah, you can call him a Sahabi in the definition of the common
No,
definition. Yeah.
I'm not calling him, but he's like considered.
But he was
The common definition, yes. The common is the Prophet. Maran al-Hakim, the common definition, yes. That's reality. Okay. Anyway, so it's a good question. We can go deeper into that. Each school of thought definitions are back. That's the Quran. Quran is one. He goes to the mom. The mom's also like, what? Julaibeeb, of all people, what are you talking about? You know? So the daughter overhears this. And the daughter kind of thinks, in some, I've read in some sources, she kind of recalls the ayah, if you can help me, Dr. Jafar, وَمَا كَانَ مِنْكُمْ خيرا if you don't mind. If you're yes, so if Allah and the Prophet decree something, we shouldn't really have a big choice in it, because and really it's not because of forcefulness, it's because clearly this is likely the right thing to do. This is likely the most beneficial thing to do. Right? And sometimes we kind of go to this route of, are we being forced into this? No, you have a choice. Just like we talked about actually with the 2 weeks ago or several weeks ago, but the narration of the blind man, where the Prophet the blind man came. He was like, "Hey, I want you to heal my blindness." He's like, "Okay, I can heal it, but it's better if you actually are patient. It's better if you're patient with this blindness because you have more work." And the guy goes and he comes back and says, "No, can you cure my blindness?" And he gives him the eye to cure his blindness. It's the same thing, right? Would it have been better if the guy actually had been patient with the blindness? Yeah, probably better for his life and better for his akhirah, better for him in every way, though he cannot see that aspect. So it's the same thing here, right? If Allah decided something and Rasulullah by default decide something through God, then it's better if you really shouldn't have a choice, because so she has this.
Oh, I was gonna say, is that idea you're talking about? Is that linked to the concept of khair, like goodness? Like there's goodness in, I might be mispronouncing it, but like khair, Khair.
I mean, like you're saying that if whatever God decided for you, or whatever God requested of you is good.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Is there like a different concept you're touching on, or is it like the same
No,
thing?
no. So the lady, the girl that's supposedly going to get married, recalled this verse. She recalled this verse for her narration, and then she said she actually told her parents, "Listen, if this is what Rasulullah wants from me, then that's all I'll have." Right.
Understood. Okay.
So then the dad comes back. He's like, "Okay, well, I guess I accept. Does this guy have a mouth? This guy can be anything, right? Right? What's this guy's dowry? What's it's gonna take? This poor guy, right?" So Rasulullah says, "Mahrul Jannah, mahruha al-Jannah." The mahar for her is gonna be paradise. So it's appropriate to laugh because it's just like, what is this?
Wow.
It's like how much faith do you have to have, and how much conviction you have to kind of go through this. And I commend actually the parents that actually went through it. They went through with it. She got married to him.
If the prophet tells you, it's like hard to say no.
Well, it's hard to say no, but you have to understand why, right? Because I think we have to. Sometimes you have to figure out, okay, I believe in this guy. Everything he's saying is true, but at this moment now is where I'm gonna start doubting, right?
Yeah.
But it's hard. I think it's very hard. But I think it also reflects upon us too, because again, this guy, what's his reality, right? His reality was that he was always with the Prophet and he was always listening, right? He actually, he always remembered God. He was a really good person in terms of his akhlaq, his mannerisms, right? He was very, very well mannered. Also, they said he dua, but he actually was a playful kind of like guy who joked a lot. He was actually a very nice, happy guy, right? So yeah.
So I have a question. So like a lot of Sahaba, like they betrayed the Prophet, right? But like, so he was not one of them.
So we'll get to the rest of the story. So things got married, they were living happily, and then they don't actually describe which battle. He was in several of the battles of the Prophet. Again, And this guy used to always be in the front line of the salats, always would be in the front line of the prayer, as well as in the front line of the battles. He always was in the front line of the battle. Pretty impressive. Despite all the defects
No,
of
short people were strong, so I bet he was the first line.
and strong mentally, I would say at least. At least strong mentally. Because that's all that really all that matters.
Yeah.
If you wouldn't want to argue about it.
Yeah.
But yes, I agree with you. He was strong at least mentally. So in sometime around here, because they actually are not very specific about which battle or which Ghazwa. I say it's one of the Ghazwas. I wonder if it's part of there's some Ghazwat, there's some battles that occurred. The trade routes, Mecca to Sham, to Syria and Levant, is kind of here, and the Meccans started taking all the stuff that the migrants had owned in their former houses and stuff, their former land, and they started taking it and starting to sell it. They started actually to take it in their caravans and starting to sell it over here. And I guess that, of course, against the people's will, right? So they actually started cutting them off and taking back those caravans. So I think it was one of those battles, one of those Ghazwas, one of those skirmishes that they're probably referring to here. There were several skirmishes, including Badr, that actually this was related to. So in one of those skirmishes, because I didn't find the date exactly specifically or when he passed away or when he was martyred, but in one of those skirmishes, the skirmish ended, and Rasulullah was asking his companions, is there anyone missing? Have we missed anybody? And they said, oh, Fulan, this guy and this guy. Okay. Have we missed anybody else? Fulan. Okay. And he actually asked, and they asked again, are we missing anyone else? And they said, oh, nobody else. Right? And he actually asked, where's Julaibeeb? I'm missing Julaibeeb. Where's Julaibeeb? And so they actually started looking through all the dead people, and they actually found him under a bunch of the sand, with him surrounding 7 people that were all dead around him that he had actually killed, and then he got martyred from the 7. So he actually killed 7. So Rasulullah looked at his body. He actually kind of was very sad. He was like, "Oh, you killed the 7 and then you died." Ya Allah. So he actually was sad about him. He buried him himself. He actually carried him himself on his shoulder. Went, did the burial himself, and no ghusl because he was a shaheed. So that's the story of Julaibeeb, radiallahu anhu. Inshallah, may we learn these lessons from these companions. It was quite a poignant kind of story, really. It was really.
But it's good that he got married.
Oh yeah, so thank you for reminding me. So you wonder about his wife, right? So from the fate, from the things that the caravan and stuff they actually captured and stuff, she eventually got 100,000 dinars.
Wow.
They were like,
Is that a lot?
Yeah.
At that time, it was
Way a lot at that time. There wasn't really much about that in her. Yes. So does that matter? It does matter, I think, to some people as well. But yes, it was both dunya and akhirah, and I think that's also another lesson we should also know is even in dunya and akhirah we're going to win if we follow some of these reality rules. Inshallah. Any other questions or comments?
Very nice story.
Alhamdulillah, I think it was suggested by some of the brothers here. Alhamdulillah, I appreciate that suggestion. And then do you guys have any more suggestions for next week? I have a whole list, but you guys have other people, some of the uncommon or lesser known people. I just have them. All right.
I will do my research and give you one.
Sure. Yeah. All right. For the next segment, inshallah, that's something I'm coming Yeah, it's 20 minutes, I'd say. Yeah. Was this on the whole thing? Oh, it wasn't on.
It was not on?
Yeah, that's why I was struggling. That's it.
You didn't need it. You were.
Oh man, so nobody heard your voice?
Oh.
Or?
It was on the whole thing.
Oh my god.
It's okay.
I don't think anyone was watching.
That's all right.
Honestly, that was
We-
great.
we,
It should be broadcast. Maybe you can.
No, but the audio
you can
went
set the
through.
video for it.
Yeah, no.
We'll probably edit the video or the audio and
It was
make it.
still
Right?
recording.
Somebody saw me going through there, like the audio as well.
Okay.
Stop messing with it.
the audio working? Just make sure your thing is on, because I think that was my mistake. Look at the actual device. Yeah, we just radio signals on it. Oh. Maybe when I put it in my pocket, it turned off. Oh, really? That's what happens. Oh well. Oh god. Okay, maybe I'll just hold it then. No. Yeah. Put it in your pocket. Just make sure it's on.
So, okay, inshallah. So we'll keep this focused and inshallah beneficial. Um, so you guys remember what we've been discussing when it came to the theology series last week? Remember, we're going through the book Theological Instruction by Sheikh Misbah Yazdi. And we're covering the material that he has in this book. It's about 60 lessons that go through all of the basic theology that we as Muslims should know. And it's important for us to recognize these things because the very first, 13, 14 lessons are all about Tawheed, right? And Tawheed is one of the fundamental things that is considered the basis of our religion, right? Ma'rifah of Allah is the highest, most sublime type of knowledge that we have, right? So recognizing our creator, our source, our origin is what elevates you as a human being. It's what gives you value. In fact, many people, they wonder what is the difference between prophets even, because all prophets we say were infallible, right? They were all people of very high status, all very righteous individuals. The difference is their level of recognition of God, right? Their ma'rifah of Allah, right? So, and that ma'rifah, that recognition of God, it has layers and levels and stages, right? And you can continue to ascend in terms of your knowledge of God. And to levels, even in paradise, in fact, one of the most beautiful, most grand pleasures that a believer will have in heaven is getting to know God, right? That getting that closer and closer proximity to God, getting closer and closer to the source of all perfection, the source of all ontological perfection is God, right? So by you consistently ascending towards that source in the hereafter, you get more and more pleasure, more and more existential perfection by raising your level of proximity to your source, right? So in this world, we try to understand who Allah is, and Sheikh Misbah is taking us on this journey to understanding Allah, right? And we talked last week about one of the very core arguments that we've been discussing for quite some time now about the necessary existence. Does anybody was there yet last week, or remember some of the points? Want to fill us in, inshallah, and then we can use that as a segue to the next portion of the discussion, inshallah. Anybody remember what we discussed last week?
Yeah, I might be probably will slip up on because the lines behind it still can be together, but I believe what you were discussing was what you were presenting was contingency, like Allah is contingent, like his existence is contingent in the sense that the grand arbiter of creation, I guess, but that's kind of like the part I'm shaky on, but kind of beyond that point, then he's outside of time, being non-temporal, outside of space, being non-dimensional, outside of physical space, being non-physical, or a representation of what we can see or understand, and then non-complex in the sense that it is simplified to the idea of unity, of oneness.
Okay, yeah, that's very good. Yeah, so just the one correction, everything you said was great. One correction, which was that everything, basically all of us were contingent beings, right? Meaning that we depend on the right circumstances, the right situation, the right causes to all come together for us to come to existence, right? So everything in this universe is like that. It requires other factors, other basically circumstances. The situation needs to be right for that thing to materialize. But Allah, we say, doesn't have any of those restrictions. He's the necessary existence. He doesn't have any contingency, right? So we use the example of, if everything, some people, the materialists, the people who don't believe in Allah, they suggest that, okay, well, everything is contingent. Everything in this universe, all of existence is contingent. Every single thing requires, the right factors to make it come to pass, right?
But we said that that's impossible because it's as if all of creation is standing, all of existent things are standing on a start line, right? So a race, and every single one of them says, "Look, I'm not gonna make that step into a realm of existence until the person next to me, the existence next to me, the creation next to me, steps into the realm of existence." So if everything was contingent, then nothing would come to be, right? There has to be one individual that says, "Hey, I don't care what anybody else is doing, I'm going to take the first step." That is what initiates the whole process, right? And we said Allah is that necessary existence that doesn't have any contingency, that doesn't need anything to make him materialize, make him come to be, make him come to exist. He is constantly existing. He's always existing. He doesn't have a contingency, right? So that's what we said was a necessary existence, right? And we said that the corollary of that is that if Allah is the necessary existence, he has no dependency, no contingency. So he does not depend on time, he doesn't depend on any space, he doesn't depend on matter, he's non-dimensional, non-physical. Remember we said about complexity. Does anybody remember why complexity is not possible for the necessary existence? A being that has no contingencies. Why must he be simple, non-complex? Do you guys remember? Andrew?
Complexity means that there are interdependent parts.
Yes.
That's continuous.
Yes, exactly. Very good. Yes. Perfect. So that exactly is the reason why we said God is simple. He doesn't have parts, right? There's no interdependencies. So we discussed that. And then we talked about one of the very core things that a lot of atheist materialists bring forth is to say, okay, well, you're postulating all these things about the necessary existence. He's non-temporal, non-dimensional, non-physical, non-complex, but that's still a far cry from the Abrahamic God that you profess. That this being who's all merciful, all powerful, all compassionate, where are you getting all these things from, right? So that's the next step that we were building towards, right? So we said that the key thing about the necessary existence to remember is that he's the source of all ontological perfection, right? So anything that exists in the creation, that is basically a positive attribute, right? It exists in God in the infinitesimal form, in basically the absolute perfect form. The reason for that is because there's a very common Arabic phrase that says, "Faqidu shay la yu'ti," right? Something that lacks something cannot give it, right? If you don't have something, how are you going to give it? So if Allah is the source of everything, right? He's the source of all existence. If there's any type of perfection that exists in us, right? He has to be the source, because faqidu shay la yu'ti. Someone who doesn't have something cannot give it, right? So if we have knowledge, God is the ultimate source of knowledge. If we have willpower, God is the ultimate source of willpower, right? If we have physical beauty, you have to. I'm going to get into this point of discussion as well. But if we have any type of beauty, it must exist in God in the infinitesimal form, right? Every type of, if we're living, right, God must be the ultimate form of life, right? So, and when we say, so we're going to get into some of these discussions, some people, they'll say, okay, well, human beings are physically beautiful, right? Or an individual might be physically beautiful. Okay, then God must be very physically beautiful. That's the impression, that's the implication, right? Or they'll say, okay,
Anger.
anger. Okay, yes, I think this was brought up last week, right? You brought up the example of anger or wrath. That, okay, a human being can be angry or wrathful, angry or wrathful.
Emotions,
right? So
yeah.
God must be up to that level, right? In terms of absolute anger, absolute wrath, right?
Or oppression or meanness or
Yes. So we talked about, so there was a few things that you have to clarify about this notion of ontological perfection. Any type of goodness or virtue that exists in the creatures has to exist in God in the infinitesimal form. So you have to strip it of all notions of mortality, right? So remember we said that a human being naturally thinks. Would it be correct to describe God as the ultimate thinker? Why is that not the case? Why can God not be the ultimate thinker?
Because God doesn't need to think.
God doesn't need to think.
He's often thinking the infinite
process.
Yes, that's exactly right.
I have a question.
Yeah.
This might be off topic. If human mind or brain can figure out God and know what God is. Sorry, I asked the question very in the wrong way. Is Are we supposed to figure out God? Because if he's really, if if we can, I feel like we're not supposed, we don't have the power to figure out God. Because if we can, then he's not God anymore.
Yeah, so of course, we cannot truly comprehend God.
That's
right?
what I'm saying. Yeah,
So there's, of course, Imam
because that's what makes him God.
Yeah, in Imam Ali's first khutbah in Nahj al-Balagha, he makes this very clear, right? Alhamdulillahi alladhi la yablughu min hatab al-qa'imun. That the people who praise Allah, they cannot fathom the praises of God, right? They cannot even fathom how great God is. So of course there's a limit to the human understanding. But because of because of basically some of the very elevated individuals in the world, the imams, the prophets, they have given us an understanding of Allah, which is very high, which us human beings we normally wouldn't have been able to achieve. But because of the enlightenment that the imams and the prophets provided us, and the scriptural proofs that we have, we're able to get to a point where we can understand some of the things related to God's essence, God's attributes. But when you try to go into the very details of minutia of how does God know, how does God basically reward, how does God punish, we don't know that. That is impossible for a human being to fathom. But we have been given enough of a basic framework for us to understand and be able to explain our religion, because our religion is very rational. Allah has based his religion, and he's based the principles that he gave us in the Quran on the basis of rationality, on the basis of optics, right? So none of this is something that you're just forced to accept. All of it is based on rationality. And Allah, basically, when it comes to Allah, he is, because of his mercy upon us, right? He has made all of this capable of understanding, right? All of these basic things about who he is and his power and his magnificence.
I
He's
feel like
made it possible for us to
we just know enough.
Yes.
Like I feel like we shouldn't know more than
Yes.
what we already know.
There are certain things that we will never learn, we will never be capable of understanding, because it's not possible for a limited being to completely comprehend the unlimited, right? So it's not possible.
You're restricted by your own intellect. Your own intellect is restricted.
But in this world, there's only a certain level, and the hereafter, there's capacity to ascend even further in understanding the unlimited, right? And getting closer and closer proximity to God. But even still, we will always be limited beings, right? So yes, very good point.
I mean, even taking out the religion, even like as in physics, something in time cannot, connect to something outside of time or matter. So Allah knows no matter time. He's the beginning and the ending. So I feel like we're not supposed to.
Yes. I think there's a certain point where we realize the ontological perfection of God, the fact that God far supersedes anything we're capable of understanding. But even still, there are elements, there are principles that we can comprehend about why is God so elevated? Why is God so high? What is it that, and some of these proofs we get from the creation itself. We see the way that the creation is, the way that Allah has built this world, this universe, and we know that whatever perfection exists in this world must exist in God too, right? So that's the connection. And yes, I agree completely with what you're saying, that at a certain point it's hard for you to even understand how these things can be abstracted, how these things can be even the perfections we see in this world, how does God have that to the ultimate level? One thing that I had brought up before is we believe in these 99 names of Allah, right? You guys have heard the 99 names of Allah, 99 attributes, whatever you want to call it. These 99 attributes, some people, they say, okay, well, God has all these different names, and they compartmentalize God, right? Oh, he's the Khaliq, he's the Raziq, he's the sustainer, he's the creator, all these things, right? So, but the reality is that God is all of these things at once. Remember we said he's simple. So when you say 99 names, are you saying 99 parts of God? Are you making God complex? No, right? Rather, we say that actually God is all of these things in a single simple essence. He has no parts, right? But it's just not possible for a human being to understand all of these attributes in a simple being without any divisions, an indivisible entity, right? So that's what God is. God is indivisible, no parts, no divisions, but yet He has all of these perfections simultaneously, right?
The best way to kind of like visualize it, at least for me, and again, metaphor is never perfect. That's kind of like again, like God is not to be, from my understanding, like not personified, right? Not to be like giving human attributes, but to be as like metaphor, as like representative of things outside of his kind of thing. But like as a kaleidoscope, like 99 kind of, although it's separate parts, but in a way it's, you view it through the one single lens of 99 simultaneously, or perhaps more kind of disparate parts unified.
But brother, so
I wanted to say, sorry to cut you off,
yeah,
but
oh, you know.
but just like not even to argue, but like to bounce off like the idea of like akal. So like maybe perhaps like akal has a limit, but and again this is like again like opinion or interpretation. So I am wrong or I could be wrong, right? But you know I don't think qalb or ruh have limits in terms of like identifying the essence of like God, what God is. So I think like in the sense of like understanding spirit or heart, like as you were saying, like the the goodness in people or like even the badness in people, like it's all, as the Christians I believe term it, count it all joy, to kind of understand that there is something to be learned, and that knowledge is something that's not rational per se, but it's understood from something underneath.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think so. Qalb and ruh, they also have limits because
Of course, yes.
they're still creations of God, right?
Sure.
So all creations of God have limits,
Mm.
but of course the level of ma'rifah, the level of understanding that an individual can achieve in this world is directly tied to their aql, right? The level of their rationality. The qalb and the ruh, these are other dimensions of a human being that, especially the ruh, has a special status, and in the hereafter, it can continue to ascend towards Allah, right? So there are levels to a human being, different stages, right? Different ways that the heart, the ruh, the aql can connect to God. But I would still say that regardless of which dimension of human being you're talking about, there's always going to be a limitation. Because there's always a separation between the created and the creator, right? The khaliq and the makhluk, there's always going to be a separation, right?
Agreed. Yes.
And I think to go back to Brother
Yeah,
Hamid's
please, I
point.
wanted. So, sorry, when you say Allah has 99 names,
Yes.
isn't that really a limit?
So 99 names,
Right? Of course, I know there's
yeah,
unlimited attributes of Allah.
right.
So, but
Perhaps it's for like human understanding to be like there is that limit, kind of like perhaps there's like infinite, right? Or even, but 999 would be even too much to kind of
Yeah.
understand. So I think
great
99.
point.
So 99, these are what we call tawqifi attributes, right? So people take, for instance, Goshen al-Kabir that we recite in the month of Ramadan, right? It has 1,000 names of Allah, right? So some people use like Goshen al-Kabir, right? But Goshen al-Kabir has a lot of names that are just kind of invented, right? There's 99 names that come to us from the Quran and the Hadith, right? 99 names that have been attributed or basically that God has been described with these specific 99 names. So what they're called tawqifi, meaning that they come directly from sources of revelation, right? Either the Quran or the Hadith. So yes, of course, Allah is the source of infinite perfection, and you can think of all the source of infinite perfection in a various different ways. You can classify it in, but this 99 names classification came to us specifically through the Prophet and through the other names, right?
Forgive me. It really is sad that the phrase Allahu Akbar has been so perverted. It really is sad, especially like by terrible Muslims, as well as by people that make fun of the terrible Muslims. Because if you go into the deeper meaning of Allahu Akbar, if you don't mind sharing that with us, because that will answer actually your first question.
Oh, it's not just God is great.
No, it's not. Go ahead. If you want
Yeah, so Akbar in Arabic means, it's called Ism Tafdeel, right? Ism Tafdeel means that it's a comparative, right? It's a comparative. So Allah is greater. That's literally what it means. Allah is greater. But the question is greater than what, right? Greater than what? So someone came to Imam As-Sadiq and asked this question. Said, Allah is greater than what? Allahu Akbar min nada. Like, what? Like, where is this min? Because usually in Arabic, the word for than is min, right? So Allahu Akbar min nada. Like what? Like what exactly is Allah greater than, right? Is what this person was asking. So look, that's Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam said, Allahu Akbar min ayyusaf. That Allah is greater than you can even imagine or that you can even describe. He transcends all types of description, right? So Allah cannot be limited or classified in a human framework. Allah far transcends that, right? So all these things we're talking about, they really do not do justice to God, right? Allah far transcends everything. But this is within our human mortal understanding. We have certain capacity to understand the framework of just trying to conceptualize some of these very deep concepts. And of course, the actual parameter of actually understanding these concepts in that is not possible. Okay? But we can identify some of these attributes, some of these traits in Allah that exist, right? And the Mutakallimin or the theologians in Islam, they have a history of doing this, examining Allah in all these different dimensions. And there's a lot of people, they say the God of the theologians, he's very cold and distant, right? And the God of the Arafa, the God of the Gnostics, is very close and intimate, right? So they make this differentiation, right? That what we call God's transcendence and God's immanence. Have you guys heard of this term?
I have not. No.
So transcendence means God is far above anything, right?
Okay.
Immanence means that God is very close and intimate, right? So they say that Orasa or those individuals who are Gnostics who really have what we call, maybe you can say even the Sufis, right? They have a very intimate relationship with God. God is like very personal to them, right? Whereas the theologians, they kind of very much make God like this creator that's beyond anything you can imagine, that's just so sublime, but possibly even
Disconnected from creation,
disconnected,
it's like,
but the Quran, they say the Quran goes against this conception because it says in Allah Allah is very close to those who are that Allah is closer to you than your jugular vein. All these verses, right? That indicate that God is close, right? So they say, okay, well, this is a very big paradox. How is God close, but at the same time so sublime, so beyond anything, right? So it's a big paradox within Islam, right? Within all religions, really. But this is because God far transcends anything that a human being can even imagine, right? So God can be simultaneously transcendent, beyond anything you can imagine, and at the same time, he can be very intimate and close, right? So this is God can be ultimately merciful, and he can also be ultimately wrathful, right? He can be just, and he can be kind.
And that's what makes him
right?
God.
That's what makes him God, because he's the source of all these perfections, the ultimate living. So, what other questions do you guys have? Anything else? So
I had something to say about, like, because there's verses in the Quran where they say like the hand of Allah, or Arish Allah, but I feel like that's like someone's speaking to their baby, like they're using different language to like make their baby understand, but it's not like Allah speaking to us in like a metaphor that makes us humans understand, but it's not actually.
Yes.
Allah doesn't have a house. Allah doesn't have a hand. Allah doesn't have,
Precisely.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I feel like it's a common.
So this is exactly what we said, right? About God not being physical. Physicality creates limitations, right? If God had a hand or he had a face, right? These are limitations, right? So many of the theologians, especially a lot of the Salafi-oriented ones, or the ones who are very oriented, what we call Ahlul Hadith amongst the Sunnis, they said that, also another term that's used is Atharis, right? Those who rely predominantly on Hadith. They said that, okay, well, Allah said that he has a hand, Allah said he has a face, and Allah is asdaqus sadiqeen. He is the most truthful. So if Allah says, Allah could have explained this and said, oh well, I don't really have a hand, I don't really have a face, right? But He used these terms. So if you use these terms, it must mean He does have a hand, He does have a face. But they said,
ليس كمثله شيء. So
Yes.
it's
yeah. So they have this doctrine. It's called bel-kifa. Bel-kifa means bila kayf, that you can't ask. He has a hand, but it's not like other hands. He has a face, but it's not like other faces. And if you ask, well, then what type of face is it? What type of hand is it? Their answer will be like, we don't know. It's just he has a hand. He has a face. He said he has a hand.
it sounds funny, but you know, it's some kind of it's a thought process of logic that they follow. You know,
Yeah.
that's
He said he has a hand in the Quran. He said he has a face.
So it's actually true, right? That's what they.
This is actually what they believe. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. They actually believe it. Yeah.
Is that like
But they'll tell you that, oh, if you ask us, how does Allah sit on His throne? How is God's throne?
We don't know.
What is its dimension? We don't know. We don't know. We just know that God said He has it, so He must have it.
It's a fundamentalist reading.
You can't question. It's beyond our capacity to understand, right? But if God said He had a hand, said He had a face, then He must, right? Because He is the most truthful of the truthful. God could have used any other word, but He chose to use that word, that He has a face, that He has a hand. So that must mean that there's some waj, or there's some yad that He does possess, you know, even if we cannot understand it. So, you know, there's verses in the Quran, some verses say that God has two hands. Some say that He has one hand. Some say that He has multiple hands. They say, oh, well, all of these apply to God simultaneously. But we don't really know how. We just have to accept what the Quran says, right? So they take it very, like, face value, that this is just, you know, and it's because of their very literalist understanding of the Quran, and their very literalist understanding of God, right? So, one of the big discussions amongst, this is a little going on a tangent, but I think it is important to talk about. So one of the big things, one of the classic disputes in Islamic theology was about the Quran, and is the Quran created or uncreated, right? So this is like a big, actually, like, you think, hey, that's silly, but obviously it's created, right? A lot of us might say that, right? But there was a big group, and there still is a big group of Muslims, actually this is the predominant school amongst Sunnis right now, that say the Quran is uncreated, right? The Quran is kalamullah, that is the word of Allah, right? And so the word of Allah cannot be created. They say the word of Allah is extension of Allah Himself. That kalamullah, this is because Allah is a mutakallim, Allah is a speaker. This is one of God's essential attributes, right? It's one of His attributes as the creator. So whatever He says, if it's His own kalam, that is eternal. That speech it's basically immortal.
But that's the point.
Yeah, so this is their view. Yeah, I mean, and this is the way that
It's valid. Different from the Sufis. Of Allah's throne.
Yeah.
Like this act. Oh, yeah.
So the thing is, because they say that look, there's no relationality to the Quran, you know. So when Allah says that He has a yad, that He has a wajh, right? When He says He has a hand, He has a face, you cannot say, oh, He said these terms for the human being to understand, for the Arabs to understand, because this is the word of Allah. The word of Allah is eternal. It doesn't have any limitations towards human beings. It's not like Allah was trying to make babies understand, for instance. This is the word of Allah. This is like the actual way that Allah talks, you know. So this must be the reality, right? The unadulterated, pure reality must be that Allah actually has a hand. He actually has a face, right? So this is the way that they argue in their thought process, just to give you some insight into how they think, you know. I mean, we don't agree with it as Shia Muslims. We believe actually that the Quran is makhluk, that the Quran was created, right? But just to explain to you the way that they think, right?
Wait, so we believe that like God had Angel Jibril write the Quran? Is that right?
No.
No.
Like it's His word, but like He just had the angel like deliver it?
So we believe that the Quran is basically the speech of Allah, but the speech of Allah is a relational thing. Like when you speak, you have to have a muqatab. You have to have someone you're speaking to, right? So when Allah is speaking, there has to be an audience, someone he's
It has to be an
speaking to,
ear, right?
There has to be a receptor to kind of pick up what is God saying. So God communicates to that receptor in accordance to its capacity, right? So the Quran was revealed to the Arabs, right? That speech that originated from God, which was the Quran, was created, right? Naturally so for the Arabs. It's in the Arabic language, right? So it's not in the sense that you can abstractify it and say, okay, this is the absolute, unadulterated, uncreated word of God, right? So that's sort of where we disagree with the classic Sunni position.
Because then if you go deeper, if you take it away from God, right? If you say, oh, if God doesn't have the Quran, then he becomes not God. And it's almost like he's now dependent on having the Quran as part of him.
Yeah.
If you go deeper into the
Yeah,
Tawheed aspect of it. Because you have humans, now you have a Quran. It's not because God exists, then there's a
So
Quran.
all the books, like the Bible, it's also like an extension of Allah, like the original version.
It's
right?
communication from Allah to the humans, but it's because humans have ears or have intellect that requires communication. It's not because Allah needs to communicate. But
It's a creational thing. Like the Quran is a creation that's used for a human being to understand God's message, right? So that message is channeled through a text that the human being can
So,
understand.
like throughout history before the Quran, there were many other books, right?
Yeah.
That God sent. So, like, does that mean the message is changing, or were they all the same message?
They all had similarities in the message, right? But
Yeah.
every book might have had specific particularities to that time and that place, right? So there might have been some contextualizations, like if the book was given to the children of Israel, for instance, their Torah, for instance, might have certain rules or regulations that don't apply to subsequent nations, right? To the Christians or to the Muslims, right? Because society evolved, the people evolved, so God's messages changed in kind, right? With the audience that he's not because God changed. God is unchanging, right? So rather it's the people that change.
So,
right?
is it not a message to all people, as specific to the people it was sent to?
Yeah, so the Quran as a book, right, in the Arabic language was specifically revealed to the Arabs, right? However, the message of the Quran is universal, right? The message, the actual meanings of the Quran, it was given to the Arabs, but it was given to be spread, to be promulgated.
Like it was a mercy basically.
Yes. Yes, it was a mercy that was meant to be spread to the rest of the world, right? So even if it was, just naturally so, if a book comes down, it has to come in the language of a certain people, right? And then it has to be spread. So, prophet cannot be simultaneously in every single nation at the same time with a separate book for each nation, right? It has to be a specific nation he's sent to, and that nation gets the final iteration of the Quran, and then that book that spreads, right?
On the idea of like being created, like the message or the interpretation being created. It's like if a tree falls in a forest and no one's around to hear it, then it's not created. Like no one's there to hear it. So if a book is delivered and no one's around to hear it or receive it, then there is no book. The book is not. The message is non-existent.
I remember Einstein's theory. This might be off topic. If there is no the other object, then so for example, for something to be measured, there needs to be an opposite force. So if the tree falls down, but there is no one near the tree, then basically the sound of the tree falling does not exist because it was never measured. No one could ever know. If the Earth was alone in the universe, and there is really no movement, but we have the sun, there is movement. Same thing with the. So if there was an audience who got the Quran, heard the Quran, so basically the Quran was
Heard.
so actually, so you're defining the Quran as contingent, actually, almost in terms of.
Yeah, so the Quran is what we call muhkam, right?
Yeah.
It came to be at a certain point of time, it was not, some people, they say, well, God's speech is eternal, right? When God says, that speech is eternal. This is what our Sunni brothers believe, right? We don't accept that. We say, no, the Quran had a beginning, it's not part and parcel of Allah's essence. It's separate, so you can say it's amongst the actions of Allah. It should be classified as an action of Allah, right? But they will sort of abstractify it further and make it something that it isn't. And that's where a lot of this confusion arises about the hand of Allah, the face of Allah, because they say these are not relational terms for human beings to understand. God actually said this in His eternal wisdom, and so He must actually have a hand. He must actually have a face, right?
Yeah, I feel like it's eternal overthinking. Because if you believe that the Quran was created, that does not upper limit to Allah. You know what I'm saying? I mean, same with humans. You made humans, you made the universe. You can also apply these things to the other creatures that you made the angels. So saying that the Quran was created does not limit Allah.
Yes, exactly.
That's like basically the only way we can.
Yeah. So this was a source of major confusion for people early on, right? And a lot of this, when it comes down to it, believing that Allah has a face and a hand, it kind of anthropomorphizes God, right? To a level. You're almost saying that even though He has a hand or has a face, we can't really know what type of hand or face He has. But there's an anthropomorphization of Allah, right? And when you do that, it actually creates a lot of capacity to corrupt the religion, right? You can see, for instance, the Christians, when they anthropomorphized God and said Jesus is God, right? You can see how it led to a whole slew of corruption. Down the road, when you start anthropomorphizing the divine, you put it within the confines of humanity and mortality, and as a result, you start to then say, okay, well, a human being sins. A human being, for instance, goes to the bathroom. A human being engages in intercourse. A human being eats,
dies,
right? So
gets married, kids.
God has a hand, He has a face, He has a leg. Okay, then it's just one step away from you suggesting other things about Allah, right? And this is why there's hadith amongst our Sunnah brothers that say that Allah is a young boy with curly hair, and He ascends from the seventh, or He descends from the seventh heaven down to the fifth heaven, every Jummah. They have these types of narrations.
Not all of them accept it, but unfortunately, some
That is insane.
believe in this. Yeah.
And so these types of narrations exist in their books. And it's because it's like, okay, if you're naturally going to propose Allah has a hand, He has a face.
Where did they get the curly hair?
I don't know. This is
Wow.
that He's a Shad Anwar. This is the term that they use for Allah, and that he's a young boy with curly hair. And so this is truly, what this tends to lead to. When you start proposing all these things about Allah, that He has body parts, it's one step away from fully anthropomorphizing God, right?
To kind of, this is like, I think it's a related point, but I'll keep it short. But I've been reading a book. It's titled The Persian Sufis, and there was a quote in there that really stuck out. There's a bunch of quotes I highly recommend it. It's by Crispin Rice. I don't know, probably find any book, but it says like, I think someone asked Imam Ali, like, okay, why would you believe in a God you can't see? And his response was like, do you think I believe in a God I didn't see? So almost like there is power to the idea of metaphor, of interpretation, to not too loose of an interpretation, but enough to, I guess, guide rightful action.
Yes. Of course, I think there's a difference between seeing with the eye of the heart and seeing with the eye, the physical eye.
Right.
And so there's a huge difference. You can apprehend something with the eye of true understanding, the eye of basically rationality, right? And then the physical eye has its own limitations, right? So the Quran even says, "La tudrikul absar wa huwa yudrikul absar," that no eye, no vision can perceive God, right? But He perceives all vision, right? So this is truly a way to understand the way that the Gnostic thinks about God, right? That he has that full understanding and cognizance of who God is, but at the same time, he doesn't anthropomorphize God, right? Anthropomorphization goes completely against the spirit of what the Quran actually says,
Yes.
So, I think the last point I'm going to just make sure.
Yeah, you have 5 to 10 minutes. Inshallah.
No, I think I'm just going to make this last point because we can go into this in more depth. There's a lot more to this, but you guys asked really good questions, so we just made some tangents, but I think it was important.
Well, this is why we're doing this.
Yeah.
Questions are fine.
So I want to just make this point about abstractifying or immortalizing basically attributes that exist in us that we consider perfections, right? So we said thinking, right? Human being thinking, that's a human limitation. God is beyond all types of thinking. He just knows, right? He is the source of all knowledge, right? Another common thing that people will say is, okay, well, let's say wrath, right? Or anger, right? Anger or wrath, these are human qualities, right? Human qualities that exist in us that we say, okay, you got angry, you got wrathful, right? Something bad happened, and now you're angry. And
Madness,
upset,
you know.
So in God, does God become angry and wrathful and upset?
And some would say yes because it's in the Quran, right?
Yeah. So there's a few layers to this, right? One is you have to subtract all the mortality out of this issue, right? So human beings, we get upset because of our circumstances, because of the things that happen around us, right? Whereas God doesn't have, Allah's not, He doesn't change. He's static, right? Meaning that there's no change in God. God doesn't, change emotions, fluctuate the way that human beings
There's no
do, right?
time line for
Yes.
there to change.
There's no timeline. Yeah, God is immaterial of time. So God doesn't have emotions such that it fluctuates, right? There's another attribute that human beings have. It's called shafaqa. Shafaqa is like that you have like sympathy or like pity for somebody, right? God doesn't have pity. He doesn't have sympathy, right? These are human attributes. These are linked to our mortality as human beings, right? You won't find one of the names of God mushfiq. You'll never find that.
There's Shafiq, but not Mushfiq.
Yes, shafiq, but not mushfiq. But shafiq is in the sense of having that deep concern or deep mercy for someone, right? But this idea of shafaqa, or to have ishfaq, right? This idea doesn't exist for God, that He has like sympathy or He has like pity,
Or
right?
like a human to human kind of thing.
Yeah, because that's a human attribute, right? And it's very much tied to human emotion, right? Whereas God is, you have to subtract all types of mortality out, right?
So I have a question. So are you saying that God does not feel anger or wrath?
Yeah. So when it comes to anger and wrath of God, this anger, wrath, you have to subtract first off all this mortality, right? So all these elements.
The
of
word
mortality,
feeling has to be removed,
right?
first of all.
That God changes or fluctuates its state, that doesn't exist, right? But then you get into the question, okay, well, when it comes to emotion, there's certain verses in the Quran that suggest that God does get angry or does get wrathful, right? That like غَضِبَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ, or what is it? There's another verse.
Like what He did to the children of Israel? Like that?
Yes, you can say, for instance, there's another verse.
وباءوا بغضب
بَاءُوا بِغَضَبٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ, right? بَاءُوا بِسَخَطٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ, سَخَط, غضب. There's another verse. لَمَقْتُ اللَّهِ أَكْبَرُ مِنْ مَقْتِكُمْ أَنفُسَكُم. This maqt is another word for despite, like rancor or hatred, right? So all these verses exist in the Quran, right? So, or فَلَمَّا آسَفُونَا انْتَقَمْنَا مِنْهُمْ. When they made us upset, or they made us cause us distress, then we took revenge upon them. Or that there's verses in the Quran that إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يُؤْذُونَ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ, those who hurt Allah and His Messenger. Does God get hurt? Right? So, or there's another verse, وَاللَّهُ لَا يَسْتَحْيِي مِنَ الْحَقِّ. Allah doesn't have any type of istihya, any type of shyness when it comes to the truth, right? It's like, well, okay, like, are these attributes of God that God actually is has these emotions? So the thing is, the best way to understand this is very much in the sense of yad and wajh, right? Which we just talked about, these concepts. They're relational concepts that a human being needs to understand, right? That the hand of God is over their hand, for instance. We need to, like Brother Muhammad said, these are things that Allah uses to try to help us to understand. But we truly cannot understand Allah, right? We truly cannot understand the nature of God. But we know that God is not physical. This idea of Allah having a hand, it's taken in a metaphorical, figurative sense, right? In the same way, many of these specific emotions that are mentioned in the Quran, we cannot understand. These are relational for us to understand.
They have effects. You
Yes.
understand them through their effects, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. but basically in God they truly do not exist, right? But it's rather in the manifestation of how, like basically God's creation, that these attributes come out, that these emotions come out. So for instance, somebody came to Imam al-Sadiq and he said, he came to regarding this verse, فَلَمَّا آسَفُونَا انْتَقَمْنَا مِنْهُمْ, this verse, that when they basically caused us distress, right, we took revenge from them, right? فَأَغْرَقْنَاهُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ. This is about the people of Fir'aun, right? When they caused us distress, right, we took revenge from them, and yet we drowned all of them altogether, right? So somebody came to Imam Hassan and said, "Oh, Allah gets distress. What is this? That Allah feels sadness or He feels emotion?" You know. So he said, "No. This does not mean that Allah feels these emotions. Rather, Allah has created awliya, representatives of His own, right? Who actually are basically they feel these emotions, right? They feel these emotions when they see their people belying the truth. Prophet Musa, for instance, he is the one who felt that emotion.
That's why he used the Jama'. That's why he said Asafuna. That's why he said all of us.
Yes. So
Oh,
Prophet Musa is the one who felt that emotion of that basically that disgust towards his people and how they were relying on God, right? And then so basically what this means is that Allah through His creation, He makes known basically some of these emotions come out through His creation itself. Allah is the source of everything. He's the source of all perfections, right? But the way that this basically these emotions get manifested is through the creation itself, right? So Allah Himself is beyond all types of emotions. He's beyond all types of human limitations, changes from human beings. But it's rather the creation itself that is a reflection of Allah's perfection that then manifests those attributes, manifests those emotions, right? So it's a very deep concept. But I think even when you think about it when it comes to heaven and hell, right? There's verses in the Quran that actually personify hell as wrathful to the disbelievers.
Hal min mazid, it talks even.
Yeah. Like hellfire is not like, is there anybody else that can enter us? Or that what is it? There's a verse إِذَا أُلْقُوا فِيهَا سَمِعُوا لَهَا شَهِيقًا وَيَتَفُونَ. That hellfire is literally like raging for the disbelievers, right? It's almost like bursting in anger, So hellfire itself is the manifestation of God's wrath, right? But God Himself it's not like He's wrathful, He's angry, it's the creation itself that manifests that anger and that wrath towards the disbelievers, right? Same thing with heaven, right? Heaven itself, is the angels themselves in heaven. Like enter heaven in peace and tranquility, right? So yeah. جنات عدن مفتحة لهم الأبواب. Their doors are all open. The doors of heaven are completely open to the believers, inviting them therein. So you have all these. Jannah itself is a manifestation of Allah's mercy and rahmah and His pleasure, right? Whereas hellfire is a manifestation of His wrath and His anger and His ghadab, right? But Allah Himself is not the one carrying those emotions. It's actually the creation, right?
Actually, one can even argue not just Musa alayhi salam, even the angels, even all the atoms and all the creation, like all the rocks and then the seas, and they're all probably unhappy about injustices because they don't have the free will, I guess, to create injustice. They're always kind of obeying Allah. They're always kind of like they know what the correct path is. They're unhappy about things going the wrong way. So I think they prefer us to even those creations, not just, I guess I would say Musa alayhi salam. But yeah.
So, there's many verses in the Quran that suggest this, Like, what is it? There's a verse.
فما بكت عليهم السماء والأرض وما كانوا.
Of course, that's a great example. That the heavens and the earth didn't cry over them, right? Or there's a verse, right?
Sorry to cut you off.
وقالوا اتخذ الرحمن ولدا. What's the verse? تكاد السماوات يتفطرن منه وتنشق الأرض وتخر الجبال هدا أن دعوا للرحمن ولدا, right? That it's almost as if the heavens, the earth, the mountains, they're all like almost ripping asunder because of the
injustice,
abomination from these people saying that God has a son, right? It's like the heavens and the earth and the mountains are themselves like actually manifesting God's will, right? And basically detesting this abomination, right? And so that is the emotions themselves come from the creatures because God is unlimited, right? But these emotions can get channeled to the creation because of God's, God is sort of, creation can manifest some of these attributes, right? And sometimes these emotions, when disbelievers disbelieve in God, it's actually the representatives of God that then feel those emotions, right? That are then attributed to God, right? But it's a very, very deep concept, and it's a very, very good one to discuss further. But I hope that sheds some light on it.
Thank you. That was really amazing.
Of course.
You did a really good job of explaining, especially like the end part. Now, I was confused about like God's anger and like how does he feel, but that explained it better that it manifests through his creation.
Yes.
Thank you so much. I knew the lecture was good when he was paying attention. Now he's doing really good.
So you have to attend more so we can know which lectures are good, which ones are bad. Any other questions you've got in the chat? Anything else you have? All right.
Cool.
Ahsantum.
Yeah, great questions, guys. Inshallah.
Do you think it's because the mic wasn't close enough? Or, hey, Andrew, for some of the sessions were maybe not exactly. We're not forgive me, but because some of it is like for other people and stuff.
It's always enjoyable.
I hope so.
Thank you so much.
Even if you can't attend, we have a channel.
I'm about to pass out. Wonderful lectures, probably. Yeah.
Why is when they do
I have a fear
We'll
of
talk about it.
Maybe if there's
fear of information. Because sometimes actually, people you ask, you wonder if do they know, and then will they just kind of like dismiss it, right?
Right.
Or number two, judgment. Do you think will they think or will they think I'm ignorant when I ask this question, or will they think I'm being pretentious? I'm being offensive, or even beyond judgment, will they think I'm actually outside, the realm of Islam? Do they think I'm an atheist now? Because that actually happens in a lot of sessions. Sometimes you'll have this one squeaky